Set blasters on full.
What's up guys, Gripe here with another review, and today we're going to check out the Mattel DC Comics Multiverse Batman The Dark Knight Returns action figure. And although I'm a little iffy about Mattel figures, I am a big fan of The Dark Knight Returns, so I figured I'd pick it up and do a review so you guys know if it's worth buying. As always, we'll start off by checking out the packaging, and Mattel definitely did a unique job with this. It's very unusual with the angles. You have a slant up here with the DC Comics Multiverse on top. Underneath that, you got a nice big window. You can see the figure and the accessory, that Batarang there. And to the right of that is a Batman Dark Knight Returns logo. On the bottom, you have a nice picture from the comic itself. And to the right of that, you have the Batman Dark Knight Returns Batman, and it is 30th Anniversary Edition. On the side here, you've got that same drawing from the comic book, a little bit bigger. And on the back, you've got pictures of the three figures in the series. You have Batman, Superman, and Son of Batman. And you have a big one of Batman himself. And on this side, nothing but the Multiverse logo and DC Comics logo and the UPC on the bottom. Alright, so let's crack this thing open and check out what you get inside. And it does come with this little blue Batarang, which is sculpted fairly similar to it is in the comics. You've got a big China stamp there on the one side, which is annoying. It's also a very pliable material, like a soft rubber or a hard foam, so it is definitely on the cheaper side, but it does serve the purpose. So now let's check out the sculpt and paint on the figure itself, and overall I think they did a pretty good job with the likeness. It definitely looks a lot like Frank Miller's Batman. And the paint app definitely has some issues, but overall it's not as bad as I was thinking it was going to be, considering it's a Mattel. The head sculpt is also above my expectations, which is nice. There's some good details sculpted into it, not only in the face, but the mask area here. You can see he's got some furrowed brows, he's got the wrinkles above his eyebrows, and the face itself is actually pretty nicely detailed. The paint is a very flat flesh tone, which is meh, and there's also some fuzzy lines here where the mask meets the face. This side isn't as bad as the other side. The rest of it is pretty plain. There's really not a whole lot of detail to it. The cape is also actually pretty good. I think it's sculpted fairly well. I also really like the material they use. It's a nice, soft, flexible, I don't know if it's a plastic or a rubber, but whatever it is, I do like the pliability of it. I also do like the sculpt of it. It's got some nice folds in there. I think they also did a good job with the body sculpt. There's a lot of nice musculature here. It's also got a little bit of a wash on it. As you can see, it kind of really makes these muscles pop. You can see those light spots there on the shoulder. Not that this Batman really needs his muscles to pop anymore. They are gigantic. But again, I really think they did a good job with sculpting the muscles. You can see just how big those arms are. You can see there's also a bit of a gap depending on how you turn that bicep compared to the shoulder. But it's not terrible in most poses. Overall, the gloves are also pretty good, but the fins are super rounded. It's probably due to the age range for this figure, but it's definitely not like the comics. But they did get some good wrinkles sculpted in around the hands and wrists there. The belt is also pretty good. The sculpt on it is pretty nicely detailed, and you can see the paint really didn't get in those crevices, but I actually think I like the way that looks. It almost gives it like a washed look, and it kind of adds a little bit more texture to the belt, which is nice. You can see in the back here, it's a really good spot here where you can notice that kind of black wash that they applied, although you're not really going to see it too much. I think the trunks are also nicely sculpted, some asymmetrical wrinkles, and you can see that goes all the way around, and Batman has an abnormally flat butt considering how muscly he is. There's also a bit of a gap here on the belt, which is kind of annoying. You don't notice it when you're looking straight on, but when you look from the top down, you can really see it. It's almost like a yellow platform that his waist sits on. Legs are also really nicely sculpted, a lot of great musculature in there. There's also a little bit of a wash applied to those as well, although it doesn't seem as much as in the upper torso area. But again, everything is sculpted pretty well on those. I think they really captured the musculature well. You can also see there's a bit of a molding issue here. There's some cracks in the plastic. I don't think it's really too big of a deal, but it is something to be aware of. I do like that the top of the boots overlap there, so it's not just one solid piece. I think that's a nice little touch. They also sculpted some wrinkles into the ankles here, which is nice and gives us some details to what would otherwise be some fairly flat boots. And speaking of flat, you can see the feet are not flat. This one is actually twisted a little bit, and it does make it a little bit harder to stand and get into some decent poses. You can really see it there. It's maybe a few degrees of an angle, but it is a little bit annoying. And it does have some decent treads here on the bottom, and he's got peg holes in the toes rather than the heels. So now check out the articulation on the figure, and this is where things really go downhill, unfortunately. And this is especially true with the head. There's really no joint whatsoever. It's just kind of a loose peg, and it makes him more like a bobblehead than an actual action figure. You can get him to look up about that high, and he looks down about straight. The head will sort of stay where you put it, although if you bang into it, it'll just kind of drop back down to a neutral position. You can get a little bit of movement out of it. You can also get a little bit of pivot. And again, it will stay as long as you're gentle with it and don't bang into it or drop it anywhere. But that's really all you're going to get as far as pivot goes. You can turn it pretty much all the way around, but that's really the only articulation, so to speak, in the head and neck. Shoulders go up about straight, which is probably to be expected of somebody so muscle-bound. And if you really force it, you might be able to get a few extra degrees of articulation out of it, but that's about it. You can rotate the arm completely around the socket, but the arms are huge and they will rub up against the cape there. But that's about the extent of articulation you're getting out of the shoulder. You do have a bicep cut, and you can get that pretty much all the way around if you want. And he does have single jointed elbows, but that's it. And you're really not getting a whole lot of bend on those. You're maybe getting, say, 70 degrees or so. And there is no other rotation on the arm. There's no rotation at the elbow or the gloves. The wrists are just swivel. You can just swivel those around. You cannot hinge them up and down in any direction. So that's also a very limited joint there. The diaphragm is not terrible. Fairly similar to a Marvel Legends diaphragm. You can get a pretty good bend forward and a decent amount back as well, although the cape is really limiting you. You really can't get it back too far. You do have full rotation at the waist. You got that big belt platform there. You can see the gap. And you do have to be careful when you're rotating. The sides will rub up on top of the belt there, so just be careful with your paint. The hips are actually not that bad. You can get almost a full split going out sideways, which is fairly nice. You're also a bit limited with your kick forward. You can get maybe around 45 degrees or so. The trunks are a soft plastic, so you can kind of force it a little bit. But you're still maybe 50 degrees at most, and that's all you're going to get. The kickback really isn't that bad. You can get probably somewhere around 40 degrees or so, so that's a pretty decent kickback. It's also because he has absolutely no butt. And while there is no upper thigh cut, you can get a pretty good rotation on the hip socket itself. You can rotate it outward well over 90 degrees, which is nice, and you can rotate it inward a few degrees as well. He does have single jointed knees, which is fairly disappointing, and you're really not getting that good of a bend. You're almost getting 90 degrees, but not quite. And that's unfortunate because it limits you from getting some of the cool poses out of the comic. You do have a boot cut, and you can rotate that pretty much all the way around if you want, but the ankles are fairly disappointing. You can extend the foot about that far, and it goes up only about that high, maybe 10 degrees or so. And there is no rotation, and there is no pivot. So it really leaves some awkward looking feet when you're doing poses. So now check out the size and scale of the figure, and if you measure from the very tip of the cowl, he stands at 6 3/4 of an inch tall. And here he is next to the Marvel Legends Mark 43 on the right, which is a 6-inch figure, and the DC Collectibles Arrow figure, which is a 6 3/4 inch scale figure. And he is maybe a little bit tall for a 6-inch line, but don't forget Frank Miller drew Batman as being really tall and really muscular, so it's really not as bad as it seems. So overall, I have some pretty mixed feelings about this figure. I think the sculpt on it is pretty good. The paint app on it is also not bad. It could have been much worse. The articulation, on the other hand, is absolutely horrendous. You also get that cheap foam batarang, which really isn't make it or break it. But honestly, I feel like this figure is worth $15 and not $20. If you're really a big fan of Dark Knight Returns and Frank Miller style, then it's probably worth adding to your collection if you don't want to spring for the Mezco. But honestly, I would say save up the money and get the Mezco figure. You're getting a much better figure for your money. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed the review. Subscribe for more.